join us.
We do ask that everybody stay muted, and we'll take questions in the chat box in order to keep down the drain on the screen. Okay, I see it's 2 o'clock. So I will say good afternoon to everybody. I'm Barbara Bailey. I work for VC Loudon. I'm in charge of Master Gardeners. And we are starting our kickoff series with some Master Gardener at home lessons. Literally, everybody is at home for the most part. I would like to remind everybody to keep your mute on so we don't hear any background noises. We will take questions in the chat box. So if everybody's familiar with that, you know how to press it. For those of you that are not, if you look down at the bottom of your screen, you might have to get your cursor to wake it up down at the bottom of the screen. It says chat, and a box will come up to the side, and you can say chat to everyone for a question. And Denise will take questions in that regard. So please try not to interrupt her and send a little chat, and I will tell her she has a question. I would like to introduce Denise Palmer. She's been a Master Gardener since 2005. She is our vegetable queen, and she's going to be doing the lesson today on preparing your soil for vegetables. So Denise, without further ado,
Thank you, Barbara. I'm going to get my PowerPoint up here. Can you see it, Barbara?
Share screen.
Yeah, a learning experience. So everyone, this is my first Zoom session. Usually I'm used to very familiar with standing in front of people. And so you'll have to bear with me as I learn how to do this.
You got it.
All right, now. There we go. So I think everyone can see it. Barbara, can you see it?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
Good.
All right. So, so welcome and thank you for joining me. I love to talk. Everyone knows I love to talk. If you've seen me before, then you're well prepared for me talking. As Barbara said, if you have questions during the course of the presentation, please use your chat box. Otherwise, we're going to be on our way here. So a couple words about the vegetable garden soil. A lot of people like to think about their seeds and their plants and this and that, but really your garden soil is the most important component of vegetable gardening. A healthy garden soil will help you have healthy plants and can help you in some pest and disease resistance issues as well. So this is where I like to concentrate first off is the soil, because it is the most important component of the vegetable garden itself. Before we get into the actual soil, we may have some new gardeners with us. And it's April, the day is brilliant, the tulips are blooming, everybody feels like, well, let's go to Home Depot, except Home Depot is restricting access, so you probably have to stand in a line first before you get into Home Depot. But for our new gardeners especially, I want to point out that before we go to gather our ingredients or all the things that we need to do or get it and with our and we buy all these things, we really want to plan for what it is we're doing first. Now that everybody has their families kind of being held hostage in their house, it's an excellent time to gather the family around and decide what is it we like to eat. Most of us live in a suburban house situation. We probably don't have a lot of space. So what we want to decide is what is it we really want to grow? If you're a new gardener, let's keep it smaller, let's keep it simple, and ask the family. Now, if somebody in your family likes to eat, let's say radishes are a great spring vegetable and they're quick growing. And it might be good to assign that family member the task of doing radishes. And they would be out of your garden pretty quickly and you could go into a summer vegetable. But sit down, plan, design your vegetable garden space, draw out your beds, look at your packets on the seed packets. It's kind of like when you go to a nursery and everybody gets that small tree and then they plant it right next to their house. And then suddenly in 10 years, you've got this huge towering thing right next to the foundation of your house and you're hacking at branches to get it to fit the space. That's what vegetables can kind of become. If they're too close together, they'll be unwieldy. You can have some disease and pest issues because our vegetables are too close together. So make sure that you're planning out plenty of space for your vegetables in the vegetable garden space. Another consideration in our vegetable garden is don't forget to include your herbs and flowers. Monoculturing a vegetable garden can be detrimental. We like to put herbs and flowers because we like to create a diverse environment which will draw in some beneficial insects and sort of hides maybe some of those vegetables and sort of diversify what we have within our vegetable garden. A lot of times I like to say that the flowers and herbs are best put on the perimeter of the garden. Unless you have a larger garden, then you can get them planted amongst your regular vegetable rows. Now we have, in the vegetable garden, we have a spring season and we have a summer season. So we don't want to put everything in at once. You know, lettuces are great for putting in right now. Tomatoes, not so much, because we may get a frost yet because it's not quite time for them to go into the vegetable garden. So we want to hold off on putting our summer vegetables in. And right now we just really want to concentrate on getting our spring vegetables in. Planting at the proper time, again, is vital. Frost will take out those tomatoes or the basil that maybe you purchased at Home Depot or one of the other big box stores, and then you're going to have to go buy some new ones. So generally, summer vegetables, we don't start thinking about putting them into the vegetable garden until after Mother's Day, which is around May 10th. And if you're a new gardener, find a free or almost free garden planner. They have some really spectacular garden planners out there. They'll send you texts, they'll send you emails, they'll let you know exactly when it is you're supposed to put something in, when it's right for our particular area. Some of the things I have listed here, those are from last year. You might find some others out there this year, considering that vegetable gardening has now become such a huge sort of entity as more people have time to grow their own fresh food and may grow their own fresh fruit out of necessity. So to a new gardener, again, we're going to target the new gardener on this particular slide. If you're trying to choose a location, so I have a neighbor who came to me a couple weeks ago and she says, guess what, I want to grow a vegetable garden. Now, I've lived next to these neighbors for the last 17 years, and they've never expressed any interest in growing a vegetable garden, but they came to me and they said, we want to grow a vegetable garden. Tell us where we can put in a vegetable garden. So I went through my checklist and I said, you know, we really want it pretty close to the house because we want to be able to look at it and go through it easily. We want to be able to water when we need to water so that it's not an arduous process for us to haul water from the front of the house to the back of the house and so forth. Also sun exposure. So right now we're going to be tricked a little bit because guess what? None of our trees have leaves on them yet. They're just starting to pop out on some of these trees. But right now, everything looks like it has 8 hours of sun. My own backyard, which I've had for 22 years, right now is full sun all day long. But in another 2 weeks, I will have a very teeny spot of 8 hours of sun in my backyard because all of the sure to get the leaves out on where you do have 8 hours of sunlight, and 8 hours of sunlight is necessary for summer vegetables. Now, can you grow a plant, a tomato plant, in 6 hours of sun? Certainly you can, but what happens is you get a lot of green leafy growth and you don't get much fruit. 8 hours for our summer vegetables is the minimum that you need. Now, 6 hours is good for our leafy greens, our onions, our carrots, our cucumbers. I grow cucumbers in 6 hours of sunlight quite successfully. So if you only had that kind of sun, there are some things that you could grow in your spot with 6 hours. If you live on an older property, black walnut trees. We want to keep our vegetable gardens about 60 feet away from them because they do have an allelopathic property, which would result in some of our vegetables not growing correctly. Obviously, drainage channels, torrential rains, like the torrential rain we had last night in the thunderstorm, we don't want to put our garden directly in a drainage channel. That's just going to wash away our garden, or it's going to keep our vegetables so that they just feet
Denise?
and free from hello.
Yeah, Denise, you're cutting out.
Okay, so do you want me to
Yeah, you might want to have to take your picture down. Sorry. Now it's frozen.
hello?
There you go.
You got me?
Yep, got you back.
Okay. So we'll just have to get through the get through the technological things. So we want to keep our vegetable garden. Also, we don't want a lot of large rocks underneath our vegetable garden because it would hinder good drainage. For those people who may have a rocky backyard or want to have an in-ground garden and want to dig down, and there's a lot of rock, I really recommend that you consider raised beds as what you should have. Just simply because a lot of those rocks you're not going to be able to remove, and they're just going to break a lot of tools. Space considerations, again, this is for the new gardener. If you've already planned and you've made a list and we're going to do all this and we're going to do all that, I usually say take that list and cut it in half. Because you be successful in getting some experience underneath belt, so that you know how vegetables grow, how the different vegetables grow and their needs, really is important. If you go big, you will probably lose interest in it when things get really big and wild, and then you just be like, I'm done with this. And we want you to be successful. So new gardeners start small, sort of scale up as you feel comfortable. And then the last consideration, and this is a very important consideration, is wildlife. wildlife and critters. We all probably have some kind of problem with them, even if we live in suburbia, whether it's deer, groundhog, bulls, moles, foxes, opossums, what have you. We all gonna probably have some kind of critter issue. And when we're establishing our vegetable garden from the get-go, it is so important to consider how you're going to exclude your wildlife from that garden, and get that installed immediately. Because what's going to happen, you're going to plant something, or you're going to put a transplant into your garden soil, and next morning you'll come out and Mr. Bunny has decided that he's going to eat your lettuce, which has popped out of the ground, or Mr. Groundhog is going to also be over there munching away, and our hearts are going to get broken because we didn't install the fencing when we needed to install it. So it's an important consideration is to get up your exclusion techniques, especially fences, early before you do any planting in the garden. Now we'll move on to the next slide. Hopefully I can do that. I may have to. I think.
Can you hit your arrow key?
Yep, it's not working. I guess it must have froze. So I'm. So can I do, Barb? Can I just do unclick the share and then share it again?
Yes, you can.
All right. Let's see if I can. Yeah, there we go. I want to do a bit on raised beds, sort of some of the semantics regarding raised beds, because most of us are probably, if we live in have a smaller situation or in suburbia, we're probably going to consider raised beds. And now's the time to actually be building those beds. And I want to point out some of the benefits of having raised beds. You don't have to dig. Many people think, well, I've got to dig these raised beds into this ground, and then I've got to put a frame around them. And, you know, and then we get into digging, and we get into rocks, and we get into breaking our tools, and we get into back-breaking labor. But really, when you're building this bed, you don't need to be digging. You can set that frame right on top of the ground. Of course, you want to cut your sod down as close to the ground level as you can. And we're going to want to put cardboard or 6 sheets of newspaper on underneath, and then put our frame on top. And then we're going to fill up our garden boxes from there. So we don't need to be digging into the ground in order to build a raised bed. We can set it on top of our sod. We don't need to dig up sod, figure out where that's going to go. A lot of the home improvement stores sell kits. They have the kits. They're easily to assemble. A lot of times you just need maybe a hammer or a screwdriver or something to put them together. When we talk about materials, it's a question I commonly get asked. Is materials. What can I build a raised bed out of? The preserved lumber, which is in the home improvement stores, which is marked ACQ, is perfectly safe for homeowner use in a vegetable garden scenario. Some of us older folks were back in the day when they had the CCA preserved lumber, and that was phased out for homeowner use prior to 2002. And that lumber is no longer available for use at the homeowner level. So the preserved lumber that you're going to find in your big box stores now, and it's marked ACQ. There are some other markings, but it's all safe and should be safe for use in a home vegetable garden, to be used as a frame. If you're an organic gardener and you hold to organic principles, then preserved lumber would probably not be appropriate in your particular situation. Recycled lumber is a great thing. One of the brand names is called Trex. It's a great way to build a raised bed. Just understand that the longer the length is, you're going to have some flex in those lengths, and so you'll need to stabilize some of those lengths by use of landscape spikes or some other kinds of means if you have long lengths. Bricks are perfectly fine, stones. And then concrete block. There's some stuff out there in the concrete block world because concrete block does contain fly ash. The jury is out as to whether that fly ash poses a risk to a vegetable gardener, but the safest thing to do is to make sure that you're growing your vegetables 6 inches from the concrete block, or use plastic material and line the concrete block which faces your garden soil in order to minimize any risk to you. No railroad ties and no power poles. Please keep those out of your vegetable garden. I know sometimes they're laying around and nobody's using them, but they are definitely not appropriate materials for your raised bed. And then the great thing about raised beds, you can start with one and then you can build on it and you can build another one, and before you know it, your backyard's taken up by raised beds, and it's a beautiful thing. So let's talk about soil. So you notice how these master gardeners, they say soil and everybody else says dirt. So is it soil or is it dirt? Which is it? Master gardeners say soil because we understand that the soil is a living, breathing thing. It has living microorganisms in it. It can be healthy, it can be unhealthy, and depending, its health depends upon what you do as a gardener to the soil. Dirt is one of those things that you get on your pants. It's, oh, I got some dirt on my pants, or I got some dirt on my gloves. So soil, we consider a living, breathing sort of entity that we can make better or we can ruin depending on what we're doing. Which one to use and when? So we go to the home improvement stores and we just see all of these bags, and we see all these bags laying around, and people become confused about what it is they should be using. And if you find a bag, it's marked garden soil, read it and make sure that it's appropriate for filling a raised bed for vegetables. So we're always reading our labels and we know what we're getting ourselves into. So garden soil, you'd say, oh, that's what I want. I'm building a raised bed. I need to fill my raised bed. Let me get some of this garden soil. Make sure it is labeled appropriately for vegetables. There is some garden soil that is not. It will say that it's appropriate for ornamentals or other uses. And then there's some that says that it's rated for vegetables. We see bagged compost. Some of us are composters, so we make our own compost, maybe in our backyard. But a lot of times we're buying compost, bagged compost. Compost, although an excellent organic material to amend your soil with, cannot be the only ingredient in a raised bed or in a vegetable garden situation. It's simply too light and will not have enough heft to anchor plant roots, and it won't have enough living organisms in order to keep your plants healthy. So we never want to use compost as our only, as soil. Let me put it like this. We never want to use just compost as soil. Compost always has to be mixed with something, and you see the thing below it. It's called topsoil. So everybody's familiar with the bags of topsoil you may also see at the home improvement stores. A perfect mix in a raised bed would be 1/2 compost and 1/2 topsoil. That would be a great mix to start with if you had to fill a raised bed. And then last, we have potting soil. So potting soil, only appropriate for containers. We should never use potting soil as something that we fill a raised bed with or put into an in-ground garden. Potting soil should be used only in containers. It has special properties to make it so it's lightweight, so it holds water, and does a variety of other things. Potting soil only for containers. So as we talk garden soil, I'm going to say organic matter a lot. What is organic matter? What is this mystery word, organic matter? It simply means dead matter. Everything living degrades, and it degrades into matter, which we call organic. Organic matter also contains living parts of plants and living microbes and soil animals. So again, organic matter can be just as alive as the soil itself. When we add it to our soil, It's a very healthy thing. Can't stress enough, success is highly dependent upon the condition of the soil our plants are growing. Let's concentrate on the soil, get it right, and then we figure out the plant part. Now, pH failure, I got a big old slide here about pH, but I just want to say a couple of things about this. pH is important in whenever we're growing plants. It doesn't matter if it's ornamentals or blueberries or vegetables. We need to know what our pH value of our soil is, because pH can be helpful and it can make for healthy soil, or it can be detrimental. It depends on what we're trying to do. So in most vegetable cases, we want to range in a pH of about 6 to 6.2. If we're outside of those ranges, we shouldn't panic and say, oh my gosh, I can't grow vegetables. What we want to do is just be cognizant of what our pH is. And then gradually, if it's too high, if it's on the scale, if it's going 7, 7.5, 8, that means it's getting a little bit high, and we should probably take some measures to help lower it. And we'll help lower it in a vegetable garden situation by adding organic material to our vegetable garden soil. If you don't know your pH, the home improvement stores often have these quick tests that you can use. Some of them can be pretty accurate. Also, the extension office in the lobby, since we can't really get into any place anymore, in the lobby has soil test kits available for you to come in and take one. You'd be going home, getting a soil sample, and then sending it off to VCE, and they would send you back a report to tell you, you tell them, I'm growing vegetables. They will send back a report and say, for vegetables, these are the measures you should take in order to have the most healthiest soil for your vegetables. And we test the soil every 3 years. If you have a blueberry bed, I'm just going to give an example here because it might be helpful. If you had a blueberry bed, let's say you had a spot in your yard and you're growing blueberries and they're the most fantastic blueberries ever, but suddenly you want to yank those blueberries out and you say, well, I want to put my vegetables there now. So blueberries do really well in what we like to call acidic soil, which means that pH is well below 6. And if you were just to yank out your blueberries and decide I'm going to grow my vegetables there, your vegetables probably aren't going to do well there because the soil is too acidic, and that soil pH needs to be brought up in order to do well for vegetables, because the vegetables will not be able to uptake the nutrients they need in order to be healthy and thrive. So that's just sort of an example of pH, how different plants do well with different pH types. And I get a lot of questions about blueberries. Can I put blueberries in my vegetable garden? Can I do this with blueberries? People like to grow blueberries. Blueberries have very specific pH and it's acidic. So if you can grow blueberries there successfully, most likely your vegetables will not grow in that same place successfully. So just keep that in mind. So good soil structure is critical for healthy plants. So the structure of our soil, in the springtime, generally because we had snow, let me guess, we didn't have snow this year, but a lot of times we get into spring, into March, and we see our soil is compacted because of snow sitting on it, because of ice, whatever the case may be. And also the soil is going to be soggy. And a lot of times we want to get in there because it is spring and we want to get to planting our plants. And we need to be careful about doing that because good soil structure is critical for healthy plants. And if we get in there and we're going to just go at it and we're going to add organic matter and get the soil ready so I can get my seeds in the ground. If we're working that soil when it's wet, guess what? We've just killed our soil structure. And it's going to take a long time for that soil structure to come back to health again. So we always want to maintain good soil structure even when we want to get in there and, get to work and get this thing ready. And that's why a lot of times we recommend that when you're working with your soil, that we work with it in the fall, because oftentimes in the spring, our soil in our vegetable gardens is wet, soggy, and we really need for it to dry out before we start to work with it. We need adequate air and water infiltration into the soil. So if you ever see if you've ever seen soil where we get this rainstorm and then the water just runs off the surface of that soil, in rainstorm, it's more typical when we have with the clay soil we have. But if we're getting showers, little showers, and we're noticing the rain running off of our soil, that means we probably have pretty compacted soil, and we're going to need to work with it before we can get in there and plant some vegetable garden seeds. Also remember that, plant roots and living microorganisms in the soil, they need oxygen. And if your vegetable garden soil is compacted, there's not going to be any oxygen available for them. So we're going to have some pretty awful soil in order to work with for growing vegetables. Again, don't work soil which is wet. We had that huge thunderstorm last night. I intended to go work my vegetable garden today, and we had that thunderstorm last night, and that pretty well killed my dreams. So I'm going to have to wait for it to dry out a little bit before I get out there and get my seeds into the ground. Otherwise, I'm just going to destroy my soil structure. And we want to improve our soil structure every year. So we don't, a lot of new gardeners, they got all the hard work done. They've got their box built. They've got the box filled. They've planted their seeds. They maybe had a pretty successful vegetable gardening experience. But one thing they forget about is the soil needs to be amended every year. We have to always be thinking, what is it I need to do to my soil so that I can have vegetables, which will do well. So vegetable garden soil needs to be amended every year in order so that it continues to be good soil to grow healthy vegetables. We talked about soil microorganisms. They are essential to healthy soil again. What they do is they break down our organic matter and they make nutrients available to our plants. So, when the nutrients are available to our plants, then we have plants which are healthy and they're growing like they should be. They also interrupt disease and pest cycles in the soil, and they stimulate plant growth. Healthy microorganisms really do make our plants grow better. So we want to maximize soil microorganisms, and we want to maximize them by, number one, not working your soil when it's too wet, but number two, by practicing crop rotation. So when I say crop rotation, old gardeners will understand what that's all about. New gardeners may not. One of the things that we should not be doing as we go from year to year with our vegetable garden is growing the same vegetable in the same area year after year after year. It might be a great place to grow, maybe because of space. I have a lot of space here, so I can grow one of them huge tomatoes here. But what happens is you begin to get disease and pest resistance, which build up in that particular vegetable garden soil. So crop rotation means that we are rotating our families of vegetables. And some families of vegetables, tomatoes and peppers and eggplants, they're all in the same family of vegetable. Broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, kale, those are all in another family of vegetables. Our lettuces are in another family. Squashes are in another family. So we have several different families, and it can incorporate some of the same vegetables that we're talking about. So tomatoes and peppers and eggplant, really, you should designate one area for them to be in, and then rotate them out of that area into another area for the next year, and then rotate them out of that area for the next year. We can also consider cover crops. which are good things to put into your garden in the fall time so that your vegetable garden has some kind of cover on it to minimize disturbance of the soil, to suppress weeds and do some things there. Cover crop themselves are another subject, so I don't want to deep dive into that too much. Soil microorganisms, reduce or eliminate the use of fertilizers. Oh, let me rephrase that. So when we're consistently using conventional fertilizers and pesticides, and we use them and we overuse them, what we're doing in some instances is we're killing the soil microorganisms. So we really want to make sure that when we're fertilizing our vegetable garden, we're fertilizing it appropriately and we're not over-fertilizing it. Over-fertilization is going to mean some of our soil microbes are probably going to die off, and then we're not going to have healthy living soil anymore. So when you're putting fertilizer, make sure that you're reading the label. A little is good, a lot is usually not good because it's not being utilized by your vegetable plants. It could kill your vegetable plants if you're overusing it, and it's anything that's not being used in a conventional fertilizer situation is maybe being washed down into the watershed. Minimize your disturbances of the soil so that you have healthy microorganisms, such as tilling and tilling. So we all have our tillers. Even I have a tiller. Getting old, shoulders don't work the way they used to, but we don't want to till and keep tilling and tilling and tilling, because every time we till, we are killing soil microorganisms. So, you know, if we're tilling, we should really keep our tilling to a minimum, maybe wanting to dislodge some overwintering pests in the soil. And then once again in the fall to add our amendments to our soil. But really minimize the tilling in a homeowner situation as much as possible, because we really do kill the structure of our soil when we till too much, and we also harm the soil microorganisms when we till too much. And then once again, to make sure you have healthy microorganisms, add organic matter every year to your soil. So we've talked a lot about organic matter, and we're going to address when to add organic matter. So when you're making a new vegetable bed, let's say you're doing it this spring. If you're using that bed immediately, let's say you've built your raised bed, you've got your compost, you've got half compost, half topsoil, you've got your raised bed filled and mixed, you're good to go. You should be able to hit the ground running by adding some organic vegetable fertilizer into your raised bed, and you're ready to go. But if you're making a vegetable bed and you've only used topsoil, then we need to add some organic material to that soil. And compost would really be the only completely decomposed organic material that you would want to add, because it's completely decomposed. If you put something that's not completely decomposed and you're using it as your organic matter, what's going to happen is those nutrients are going to be tied up, because let's say you put some straw or hay or something into your garden and you're using that as your organic matter and it's not decomposed. Well, now you've added it into your soil and it's trying to decompose, and what it's doing is it's taking nutrients away from your vegetables because it wants to break down and your vegetables are trying to grow, so we have competition. So that's why if we're using that vegetable bed immediately, we really want to use something that's completely decomposed, and usually our solution there is to use compost. If you made a bed last fall and you said, well, I'm going to be a vegetable gardener this spring, and you made your bed last fall, then you have other options. You could get into cover crops, you could use animal manures, you could use vegetative kitchen scraps, you could use old crop residues from an old vegetable garden, as long as they didn't have soil dwelling disease on them. So you have some different things you could use if you're not using your bed immediately. If you already have an established vegetable, all you need to do is just add it once a year. And then we don't want to just layer our amendments on top of the soil. What we want to do is we want to lightly till them in. Now notice the word lightly. We don't need to dig to Middle Earth to get these amendments turned into our soil. We just need to get them lightly tilled in. We want to disturb the soil as little as possible. So back to that, we don't want to disturb the soil all the time. And using a broad fork or garden fork to help incorporate, if you don't have a tiller, is a good solution. Or if you just have a small area. A garden fork, just dig them in just a little bit. Again, we don't need to be digging out 12 inches of soil and putting in our amendments that far down. So these are some other organic material soils that we may find ourselves, that we may have. So we talked a lot about compost. So when I say leaves, we see the leaves, shred the leaves. Now this is material for the fall time. Obviously the leaves have fallen from the trees. Everybody has fallen leaves. They gather them, they shred them. And this really leaves, shredded leaves are really great for using as a mulch during the winter time. Because they will conserve moisture and help compaction in the vegetable garden soil. During the springtime, I wouldn't suggest using them because they will use some nutrients trying to break down. But you may have some from last fall that you gathered, and they may be broken down enough that you could use them as organic material as an amendment into your soil now. We can use grass clippings if they're untreated. Again, these could be used as a mulch for your summer vegetable garden, and they will naturally break down, and then before you know it, they become organic material in your soil. Hardwood bark and colored mulches, you know, the kind that makes our house look pretty. We're going to try to keep these out of the vegetable garden. We can use them in our pathways. They're perfectly fine. But we're going to try to keep these kinds of mulches out of our vegetable areas just because they're so chunky, and they're going to require some nitrogen in order to break down. And when they're trying to do that, they're going to take these nutrients away from our vegetables. So anything that's chunky, we want to try to keep out of our vegetable garden because it's going to take nutrients away from our vegetables. We could consider a living mulch, which it could be a cover crop. Living mulch, if you're interested in that, you can Google that. It's kind of a whole nother subject there. And then I get asked a lot of times about pine needles. Can I use pine needles as an organic material? Well, sure, you could use it. But when we're talking vegetable areas, pine needles take 2 to 3 years to break down. So generally, they're not a good idea to add to your vegetable garden unless you're waiting a long time for them to break down. Having said that, though, they are an ideal mulch, let's say in a strawberry bed or other perennial vegetables where you're not actually needing to dig into the ground to add an amendment. They're just a great mulch all around. But as far as organic amendments, I would probably keep them out. So we're gonna wrap this up by saying, you know, practical soil advice. Just don't walk on your soil where you plant. If you're planting, your feet should not be where you're planting. If you're making raised beds, make them no wider than 4 feet across, because that's what you can comfortably span. For the shorter people, you might need to make them 3 foot across. Put stepping stones in a larger garden space to keep from walking across your garden beds. If you have a large garden space, you know, install some stepping stones so that you're not walking on your garden beds and your garden soil. Again, don't work the soil when it's wet. Of your soil. Tillers are fun to use, but they really can ruin the structure of your soil if they're used too much. Use organic mulches during the season. So when the heat starts to get turned up, get those vegetable gardens covered in organic mulch. And I gave you some on the slide before. to preserve your soil structure, conserve water, and manage your weeds. And also there's organic mulches that'll break down and they'll become organic matter to your soil that you won't have to add independently. Add organic matter every year to replenish your nutrients. And if you don't add enough organic matter to your material, if you're not regularly amending your vegetable garden soil, understand that you're going to have to use vegetable garden fertilizer in your vegetable garden because your plants will not have enough nutrients in order to get themselves through the season. And when we're using fertilizers, we are always looking at that label to see how much we should be using, and we're using the appropriate amount. So there's a few resources, websites, and publications. And Barb, do we have any questions?
You are so thorough. We did not have any questions.
Cool.
Okay.
You sure nobody has any questions? Because I really want to answer some questions. It's been a long month.
No, Janice needs some questions. Anybody have any questions? No one has anything.
Nobody has any questions. Well, I hope you learned something about amending your vegetable garden situation. I'm going to, next week I'll be concentrating on the spring vegetables of the vegetable garden. Some growing tips, what you should be planting. It's getting a little late in the spring season to be planting too much, but we'll touch on some things that can be planted and also some growing tips with those spring vegetables. So if nobody has any questions.
Oh, I got some. Hang on, I got some.
Okay. Okay.
What is your recommendation for using a soil liner in a raised bed?
Soil liner, what kind of material is it?
Well, that's, I think, what they were looking for your recommendation.
Oh, generally I would go with a heavy mill plastic, like a 2 or 3 mil plastic, like a painter's plastic is commonly what some people use if they want to line the soil, if they want to line the bed. The question is, though, why do you want to line the bed? Is it because you have preserved lumber? Is it because you're using concrete blocks? You're trying to keep the weeds out of it? But that would be my recommendation to line a raised bed. You could also use landscape fabric, heavy duty landscape fabric, but understand if you're trying to keep something out, landscape fabric may not do that because it allows for some water transmission through the landscape fabric.
Okay, and then there's a question on what do you do at the end of the season with the garden soil?
So at the end of the season, so all the things I went through about amending, adding organic matter, those are things, so when we clear a garden of all garden debris. I know a lot of us get busy and we forget about the garden for a period of time, and we may come back and there may be, you know, some decayed plant material and stuff like that, but usually it's from our summer vegetables. And our summer vegetables have a habit of harboring pests and disease. So the first thing we want to do at the end of the season is we really want to make sure that our garden bed has been cleaned thoroughly, that we've taken out the hardscape, you know, our cages, our trellises, and that we've disinfected those and stored those. And then we're going to add organic matter. Now, this is the time that you could add the organic matter. Like if you lived on an acreage and you had animal manures, you could incorporate animal manures into your vegetable garden because there would be sufficient time from the fall to the spring for that to break down. We could incorporate shredded leaves into our vegetable gardens, you know, not the waxy kind like the oak leaves, but leaves that easily break down. We could shred those and incorporate those into our vegetable garden. Decomposing straw, maybe that we used as a mulch covering over our vegetable garden bed. We could use that as an organic material and incorporate that. And then once we've got our organic matter incorporated, then we want to cover. Now a cover can be as simple as putting a layer of straw, growing a cover crop, putting shredded leaves down, And we want to cover our bed because we want to minimize compaction, we want to minimize erosion, and we want to minimize weeds from growing up. Because what happened this winter, we basically didn't have a winter. So the weeds were up pretty darn early. And, we're starting to see some summer weeds start to come up in my garden. I don't know about yours. But that's what we would do at the end of the season.
Thank you. We have one more question. I'm assuming it's in a vegetable garden, but the question is putting mulch on top of landscape fabric a good way to keep weeds down without strangling the soil below?
Boy, we're going to get into a debate about that, aren't we?
Yes.
In the vegetable garden, I know I'm a community gardener, or was a community gardener, I should say, and I know we use landscape fabric out there, and we used it quite successfully. I'll be quite honest with you, to keep down our weed problems, but we're only using it for a short period of time. In a long-term situation where we're trying to use it to manage our weeds successfully, it would be my recommendation not to use it in a long-term situation. We really do there is scientific evidence to point out that there is a problem with water and gases being exchanged through landscape fabric, just besides the practical, which is landscape fabric quickly becomes a nightmare. Weeds will grow on top of it. Some weeds will go through it. And then in a year or two, you're getting pieces of landscape fabric which are growing up, and you're trying to yank it out, and it really becomes kind of a little mess. Long-term solution in a vegetable garden where you're laying it down, unless it's under 12 inches of soil, I would say not to use it. Short-term situation, in a community garden situation where you're only using it for 3 to 4 months, it is a great product, and it's a great way to keep down your weeds.
Great answer. And the last question we have is, what do you buy to put on your raised beds in the fall if you don't happen to have any other yard options? I'm guessing plant-wise. I'm not sure. Andrea, if you can elaborate on that, it would help us out here.
I would a bag situation. So I'm assuming that you don't have, and I see that I'm going to turn myself off because I see my unstable internet is back up again.
Okay.
So in that instance, what I would do is, and I'm assuming what you're doing is going to the home improvement stores or the nurseries, and they have the bagged products. And in the fall, I myself use shredded leaves, which I have gathered. And if you don't have access to shredded leaves, then I would go to one of the home improvement stores and I'd get a bale of straw, and I would spread that out over my vegetable garden. It's going to be a little bit light, so for a while you're going to need to keep it watered down, or you're going to need to keep it weighed down. Usually I use a hardwire cloth fence to put it over the straw so my straw doesn't blow away until it starts to get heavy with water. You could also use leaf mold mulch. Bagged leaf mold mulch is a great soil amendment and a great mulch for the vegetable garden. It doesn't have any nutrients in it, so it's not going to add any fertilization value, but leaf mold mulch is really an excellent material for organic matter and as a mulch. You could use that in the fall. Really anything that's heavy, that will stay, that the wind won't blow off, and that if it's chunked bigger, that you could remove easily in the springtime.
Okay, that seems to be the last question.
Yay!
All right, so thank you so much, Denise.
Yeah, I am. This is kind of a weird thing. Whoever knew that I'd be speaking to my computer in 2020, but it's kind of fun.
I did.
I got lost a couple of times. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm speaking to my computer. But it was fun, and so I look forward to seeing everybody next week.
Exactly. Denise will be on a week from today at 2 p.m. talking about spring veggies. But we also have other Zoom sessions coming on. Tomorrow will be spring tree care. Try to say that fast. Spring tree care with Carol Ivory at 10 and 2. And then on Friday, we will do an overview of the My Backyard program at 10 and 2. So hopefully everyone can join us at those times as well. So thank you,
All right.
ladies.
Well, everybody have a good week till I see you. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Yes.
Thank you. You guys are great.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.